Hi everyone, and welcome to another Adobe Live for Business. I'm Rebecca Harris and I run the public sector for Adobe Sign. This week we continue our discussions with digital leaders around the challenges that they face this year through 2020. How technology has had to play a part to help everyone adapt. There's been incredible change this year, but with change comes opportunity, and perhaps opportunity to innovate as well for some of these organizations. So we're also going to look at what that looks like. We've seen some fantastic examples of innovation this year around the world, and public sector are no different to that. So we're also going to, talk about a little bit about what next year looks like. Doesn't look like we're going back to normal anytime soon. And it'd be interesting to think about what that looks like for public sector services as well, going into 2021 and beyond that as well. I'm really pleased to be able to have somebody from public sector services represented in these discussions as well. So pleased to say that we've got Simon Clifford, who is the Director of Digital Data and Strategy for Police ICT, joining us today. Hi, Simon.
Hello there.
Thank you for joining us. I know who you are. You're Adobe customers. You're also Adobe partners as well. But can you introduce yourself and maybe give a little bit more detail about what it is that you do and what Police ICT do as well?
Yes, thanks, Rebecca. So certainly, Police ICT Company was set up a handful of years ago to help in the transformation of policing and support the introduction of new technologies to support better public protection. I head up what we call the Set the Direction service pillar, which talks, as you say, to the strategy, new capability, and innovation strands. But also we're working closely with our technology partners like your good sales in terms of really looking up to the horizon and beyond in terms of all areas of technology that can underpin our business delivery. Because fundamentally, we're not here to just be good buyers of technology, we're here to keep the public safe. And that is absolutely what we're focused on, really looking at those areas of business that policing does and it needs to do better at, because there's always a to and fro, a battle, if you will, between criminality. Some people might only cross the line in criminality once in their life and hopefully see the error of their ways, but certainly there are hardened criminals out there that are always looking to sort of gain the edge and continue in their nefarious deeds.
Yeah, and there's 43 forces in the UK that can all all sort of operate under this the same circumstances, right? So everyone has had the same challenges this year. And like I said earlier, it's been an incredibly challenging year. How has that specifically impacted policing? Like what's gone on this year with the pandemic, etc. How's that impacted?
Well, it's been enormous, and if we think about it, we've obviously had COVID-19, coronavirus, and the effects of that. But even prior to that, we had the demonstrations, climate change demonstrations. During COVID, obviously, we've had quite a lot of public disorder around the Black Lives Matter narrative, which has been really difficult and difficult time. But obviously, there's been a lot of public discussion about, on the one hand, we can't meet with others, but on the other hand, we can be out in the street in our thousands. And it's just been really, really tough from an operational perspective in terms of covering off all that ground, whilst also continuing to do our normal things, our normal areas of policing, from neighbourhood policing to responding to all ranges of crime, from burglary to domestic abuse to more serious crimes, and trying to prevent serious things like terrorism from happening. So the breadth of UK law enforcement is enormous. But clearly, we are trying to help enforce the policies the government's laid down in terms of guidance around gathering, etc. But also, at the same time, keeping our staff as safe as possible with what's happening with Corona, which has been incredibly challenging. But thankfully, there's a number of things that have been put in place that have given us a real advantage in terms of moving forward. One of the things that we are conscious of is the ever-evolving nature of law enforcement and what law enforcement is responsible for. I was in the private sector 4 years ago, and it's been an absolute eye-opener to me, sort of coming into the space, how much policing does. you wouldn't otherwise be aware of. But certainly moving to a COVID-safe environment for the public and also our staff has meant the accelerated rollout of a number of technologies, particularly working from home as I am, despite the very realistic background behind me. I am working from home right now. And the accelerated rollout of technologies like that, where we lean heavily on partners like Microsoft in terms of our Teams deployment. But certainly, some people say we've moved forward years in a matter of months, and I think that's a testament to everybody across policing, both in the technology space and also in the business, being adaptable and sort of responding to sort of the call to action.
Yeah, because of course, you're right, actually, everyone's using these backgrounds these days, and I think you mentioned there we talk about the amount of change that's come through, and I know that this is sort of a common joke almost now in the public sector circles, that we've seen 5 years of changes happen in about 5 months, which is a good thing, and it's also a bad thing in some elements as well. No one wants 5 years of change in 5 months, and I wouldn't recommend doing it again. But of course, when we talk about frontline workers quite often, but there's thousands of staff in policing that aren't frontline workers. There's thousands of staff that I do think, maybe the general public don't get to see or don't think about, that, all those back office staff as well that keep the organizations running and the operations side of what policing is. I mean, how has that been affected? Can they work from home the same as the rest of us? How does that work?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's north of 200,000 people who work in policing. Probably 60% or so are sort of what you consider frontline. So that's tens of thousands of people that potentially can work in the back office. Clearly, some areas not so much so. Obviously, we depend on a very advanced forensics these days, and clearly they work in labs. But for obvious reasons, they're probably quite safe already from a PPE perspective. But absolutely, a whole raft of our organisation have been working from home, whereas they never had been before. And I think that's true if you speak to a bunch of colleagues from other departments within government, that this is a truism. I was speaking to a colleague over in the Treasury the other day, and they'd always worked from Whitehall, and even they had started working remotely as a result of COVID. So no, I think this has been a massive national endeavour, but clearly it's presented a whole range of benefits, also new challenges. Does everybody have sufficient working space? I'm fortunate that I've dedicated a whole spare bedroom to having a home office. Yeah. Not everybody's fortunate to have that spare room. Working in a living room with kids moving around. I had to leave a meeting just an hour ago because I had a delivery and I'm alone in the house. So ultimately, we've had to accommodate these new working practices. But equally, I've recruited over 15 people this year exclusively by Teams.
Wow.
And you can imagine the amount of people who have gone through that process. And again, special accommodation. We say, look, if the line drops off, if you don't hear what we're saying, you don't have to explain that when you're in person. If I suddenly freeze, relax, it's fine. So
and so would you say then that policing were they ready for that? Like, was the technology in place to be able to? I mean, you mentioned Teams earlier, for example. Was that already in place, or was the technologies in place that allowed policing to kind of move into that sort of work from home situation? I know certainly when I spoke to some of my central government accounts, back in March, I think it was, they were not ready. They hadn't. They hadn't finished rolling out Office 365, for example, and all of a sudden that was the shift that had to happen. What did that look like for policing?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned we have a number of we have 43 geographic forces. We also have some other forces that are. We also have Police Service Northern Ireland, Police Scotland, which are slightly distinct. We have British Transport Police. So there's different flavours of policing and how it's delivered for different purposes. And I think. Certainly every force had a slightly different picture, and certainly in some areas, some parts of the business were more enabled by nature of their role. More senior leadership were often quite agile because they had to work from different offices, go to different sites, attend external meetings quite extensively, and senior middle management probably is true. But there was a bulge in the middle, if you will, that typically had always gone to the same office to work. And I think that's where we really need to accelerate. And I think there's a couple of elements where we have, again, adapted very quickly, both in the governance and our risk appetite. Clearly, we need to protect both the public and our staff. And actually, we've modified that, because clearly the risk of COVID is a serious one. So actually, that has allowed us to realize a more mature and updated risk posture based on that. So if you didn't have Microsoft Teams in a fit state to do all your work, then were there some mitigations? Were there some other ways you could still carry on for a week or two whilst certain measures taking place that can get you that right technology? In one instance, there was a shortage of the laptops we needed for some of the new starters that I mentioned that I recruited in. So we deployed them smartphones that had decks. So they were using mobile phones to access Teams in their first few days of work before laptops could get to them. So again, it got them online, it got them productive.
Yeah.
So we've had to think out of the box. But what I would say is this really does link to that wider context, that it isn't just technology doing everything. Unless you've got the culture, unless you've got the attitude that links to this, and from that follows a much more private sector-like governance model, which is more pragmatic. And I think for that, the new normal is good for us.
Yeah. I think sometimes we can shudder at the word governance, simply because I think in the public sector, it's not known as being the sort of, I guess, the fastest process. You've got governance for security elements, and rightly so. To get a new technology in place, you do have to go through quite stringent levels of security, but also procurement as well. We've seen that sped up, certainly around the NHS this year, to enable us to get things quicker, to deliver services faster. And I think sometimes these governance processes do need to adapt, and I do think that, speaking to our wider customers within public sector, the ones that have adapted their governance processes, perhaps shortened them slightly or adapted them in some way, are the ones that are reaping the benefits sooner. And I think it sounds like policing have got some sort of element to that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, there's some things that, there's a real team sense within policing. We talk about ourselves as if we're a policing family, and we're very mission driven. So we have a mission, and that's to protect the public and also protect our staff. So when something of material effect like COVID comes along, we can respond and adapt to that. And certainly there are countless meetings that go on out of hours. There are, we talk about gold, silver, bronze meetings from a command perspective. Gold meetings kicking off, and these are chief council level sort of stakeholders at 5 o'clock in the morning, because ultimately the mission requires it. Has not been uncommon in this process. So people have really gone beyond what's expected. And again, I suppose this links actually to some of the wider piece that is still being worked through now. But ultimately, in some cases, universally, the fact that we're not traveling as much has given us more capacity to meet or do other work. But actually, there's a bit of a mental load and a strain that goes with people that are in certain roles where there's so much demand on their time, and people, you're always available. So the amount of meetings people are attending, or even those meetings down from what would normally take an hour, because it take you 15 minutes, half an hour to get somewhere, and then you have an hour meeting. You're not meeting for half an hour. Well, when it's a Teams call, you can absolutely get some good productivity in 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if you stack them back to back, there is a new level, and I think I would imagine most of the people watching this will know what I'm talking about here. There's a mental drain that I've never experienced in my entire life, very flexibly, very agilely, that talks about where you're going from one subject to another, back-to-back meetings. It's not healthy, it's not good. I think it's something we still need to improve on. To your other point with regards to procurement, however, what I would say is, the company have been very involved, Police ICT company, to support procurement to make that more streamlined, but that links to that wider culture.
I'm just thinking about the teams. They've introduced the commute at the beginning of each day, so you can actually block in some time in the diary. I quite like that.
Yes, I certainly turned on the focus time meeting, but that often gets people say, "Can I have your focus time for this meeting?" At least it holds some time till closer to the
It's a new level of honesty as well. So, talking about, I think you mentioned earlier, so, when I think of policing, we always think of, protecting citizens, etc. But like you mentioned, it's all about protecting your own staff as well, trying to keep socially distanced perhaps as much as possible if we can move people working from home. What sort of technologies have been implemented that are helping police to keep their distance and do their job more remotely?
Well, yeah, I mean, so obviously PPE, that's been central to it, and certainly there was even discussion in the early days of COVID in terms of people might recognise if they reflect back or look at early footage where police officers, whilst they were policing distancing in the earliest weeks, weren't using face coverings, and I don't think that was necessarily because of lack of availability. There's a real concern about dehumanizing the police and covering their faces. Is an element that we have a policing by consent model in the UK, but certainly the propagation of new and old technology, smartphones to underpin create resilience, certainly laptops, but equally to that point again about having a safe and health and safety kind of safe environment to work from home. So if you have a laptop, have it propped up. This one is in front of me. Have a separate keyboard and mouse. Just so your physical health is maintained.
Yeah.
Absolutely, some investment in terms of technology training and guidance to support people's mental health in terms of isolation, etc. But certainly, in terms of particular tooling, Microsoft Teams and its real advanced use of Office 365, and thankfully we're ahead of the curve. We've had a program in place for over 2 years that was looking to move all of UK policing to Office 365.
Yeah.
And increasingly the wider version of that. So not only your PowerPoint, your Excels and things like that, and your Outlooks, but also things like Microsoft Planner, which has been very good in terms of coordinating between teams, and being able to share diaries and putting out polls for meetings and stuff. All these small streamlining of technologies that help us work together and save time together.
Yeah.
Clearly being able to share files on these environments. We're creating lots more community, digital communities, virtual communities that are very tight. Certainly the company has been hosting something called the Police Knowledge Hub for a number of years. That has had increased traction, again, allowing us to work with particular areas of focus stakeholders in groupings together. Much like you get online in the private sector, but that has accelerated rapidly because, again, other than safeguarding and all the technology and the kind of normal stuff of COVID, had a material effect in the type of crime that has occurred and the incidents at certain times. There was a downward trend in fights in the street when people weren't allowed out. So that was good. But unfortunately, a lot of those transferred internally, and domestic abuse is unfortunately a very significant demand on policing, and people being cooped up at home has seen an expansion in terms of the volume of that type of crime, and the mitigations are much harder. Oftentimes, you would take somebody away, but equally they're going back and going to be locked in again if a charge isn't made. So things like that, we're having to think of new kind of prevention strategies around that. And again, technology, comes into that. How can we use the public purse most effectively in terms of how we apply our resources to protect the public as best we can? It's a moving target.
Yeah, absolutely. Because to go back to your point on, some of the crime has gone down in certain areas. Of course, lockdown. Well, the original lockdown, is that what we're calling it now? Lockdown 1. There was a lot less movement, right? And I remember when I think we engaged with British Transport Police very early on, being a national force, a force that has to, are on the railways and by their nature traveling, lots of different areas, etc. And we were engaged with them pretty early on to try and help them to mobilize. But it's funny, the crime went right down right at the beginning because no one was traveling, and some of them not to say they were twiddling their thumbs, but if you saw the pictures of some of the train stations were completely empty. But interesting then that, yeah, that of course that shift moves to other areas of policing. Some of the technologies that we were working with British Transport Police on were pretty interesting as well in terms of enabling staff to do their work remotely as well. So I think it's fair to give a shout out to those guys, because I think without some of the quick decisions I think that were made early on within their executive teams, to get some of the new technology or use existing technology in place as well, I think they wouldn't have been able to adapt as quickly as they are now.
You make a really good point. I mean, I take my hat off to the British Transport Police, and again, they have a unique set of challenges because they work across all the geographical forces. Because our rail network travels everywhere, our road network travels everywhere, so they cover the country, but also have to liaise with local forces extensively. They really have got above and beyond in terms of their transformation journey, and certainly the work we've done very with BTP. And just your good selves in terms of streamlining the process, particularly in response to COVID, has been a great example of an accelerated program of activity that was absolutely considered for a pre-COVID world in terms of delivering better value for money and efficiency through the use of digital signage for witness statements. And that's a valid use case in a non-COVID year. Streamlining the process of getting evidence, which, if memory serves, I think in the BTP example would take typically a week. So whilst you actually have a technology, because effectively most of policing has moved away from handwritten notebooks captured digitally, those go into existing kind of systems that create the steps and the processes that follow through on that. And what predates March was a process by which they're digitally captured information about witness. And that would include the address of the person giving the witness statement. And then that statement would be drafted in a proper letter, snail mail style, and sent to that person's home, for which they would do a physical signature on that piece of paper, return it and stamped in a prepaid envelope. And again, that would go through a process by which somebody would have to receive it, scan it in, capture the details, link it to that case. And that process was very efficient and very advanced for that mechanism. But still, that took on average a week, sometimes longer. That being streamlined to be entirely as you wait, completely delivered at the front line in a COVID-safe way. That means that with the victim or witness being able to digitally sign that witness statement has reduced that from a week down to 30 minutes. And that is the scale of transformation. That is actually what we can expect to see. This is the pace that we're in. We're not looking just about evolution of technology, albeit there is that. And that's going to help us run more efficient, run leaner, run more carbon neutral. We're heading towards that goal too. But equally, absolutely transform the process by which we actually do what's necessary to do our job in terms of protecting the public and prosecuting criminality.
And I was actually just about to say, apart from giving a sort of public, I guess, a platform for them to sign something on any device. I mean, that's good in itself. What is the impact for policing then if you can get something back, that used to take a week and you can get it now in 30 minutes? What's the impact for policing itself? Well,
again, there's a kind of marginal gains. I mean, that's not a marginal gain; that's a significant gain. But cumulatively, there's a marginal gain. We can improve a whole bunch of these different processes that all help bring a case forward together, allow the earlier identification of information that needs to be redacted for preparation for defense lawyers, etc., etc. That brings the whole timeline from arrest, charge, decision, going to court. If we can concatenate that time down, if we can prepare all that information earlier, that means people that are innocent, and we surface information that shows that they're innocent, are off the hook sooner, because that is a stressful thing. If you have been arrested as a suspect of something and you're on the hook for a number of months, we recognize there's damage there. It's a necessary evil of the current process we have. But anything that we can do to accelerate that and say, no, we know you didn't do it now, you're no longer a suspect. That's an enormous relief to that person. But clearly for the victims of these crimes, where we are actually zeroing in on the actual perpetrator, progress. That is really, the heart of what we do. There's a saying, and I can't quote who said it, but and I'm only paraphrasing here, that justice delayed is justice not served. We need to always look to accelerate the pace that we can deliver a good justice.
And that's a good point, isn't it? It's about trust as well. I think there was a sort of study, I think it was a couple of years ago now. It was around sort of public sector and the perception of engaging with government, and there was a lot of stats to show that the better engagement we have as citizens with our government, the easier it is to almost not to do business with the government, but to do business in general, to whatever transaction it is. If you have a better experience, and usually a digital experience is a better experience these days, then you are more likely to trust government. And I think that's probably, trust is a key word here, right? And I think getting that digital experience better is what's going to help the police to move forward too.
No, I'd absolutely agree, and certainly we have a strategy that was introduced at the beginning of this year, which is a 10-year strategy in terms of a whole range of objectives that we have in terms of how technology can support this improvement of the service delivery. But part and parcel of that is having a unified sort of systems experience. Ultimately, that despite local forces having discrete governance from Police and Crime Commission perspective or city mayor, that actually the experience of interacting with police should be as universal as possible, whether it's on our website or in person. And absolutely, there's an area of work that I'm doing, which is working with colleagues across and absolutely sharing these good stories, these actual examples of progressive action, I think will lead to increasing that universal sort of this universal citizen experience that is more pan-government. Now, that's not formalized in a national strategy as the way I frame it, but certainly I know it's within the spirit of a lot of different strategies pulling together to have a much more unified pan-governmental approach, which is user-centric, which is about the customer being the public.
It's a nice thought. It's a nice thought that we, I think quite often there's a lot of government agencies that could work in silos, and we would all do better off if we shared some of that information. But I think, it's fair to say with a company like Police ICT, bringing together 43 forces and bringing together some of that education piece, we talk a lot about the stats and the value that we've got from delivering technology. Is it sort of fair to say that that's what Police ICT is also there for, is to sort of pass those messaging out? I mean, it sounds like you're doing it with other government agencies as well. Is that the job of Police ICT?
Yeah, no, certainly. We are, policing has a long history of islands of excellence, where there are forces that are doing some outstanding work, really world-leading ways of doing things, not just through technology, but associated and supported typically with some technology. But the transfer of one leading force doing that to every force doing it as well has been staggered. It's taken some time. And again, that's by the nature of governance. And that's certainly an area where we're trying to improve on in terms of surfacing up these examples, kind of stripping away the localized technology components that limit its transferability so other forces can take advantage of that. But equally, we're looking to take that from where it's willingly shared from other government departments, whether it's NHSX investment or borders or foreign office. So those conversations are live, and anything that the public person spent money that delivers a better sort of customer journey, then we should try and service that up. I'd say in addition to that is again working closely with a number of major technology partners, working in partnership world, not just sort of customer and supplier, working together to inform public protection. We're looking to find examples that are international examples where we can find the best that exists in policing, law enforcement, public protection from anywhere in the world. If it can be landed and introduced appropriately in the UK, then that's good. What I would say, for those that don't understand the safeguards that we have, and it's been an eye-opener to me, the amount of safeguards that are in place, and they are continually being reinforced and probably improved upon in terms of the only appropriate information is shared ethically, and all those considerations is absolutely central to the development work we're doing. So not only are we considering how it's going to modify our process, how we can introduce the technology, we absolutely consider both the legality and, most importantly, or as importantly, the ethical position of that absolutely is safeguarding people's privacy all the way through.
Yeah, and that was going to be my sort of follow-on question, I guess, from that, is that, you know, we've got all of these learnings. We're doing some, or the policing are doing some fantastic work in different areas. I mean, what's some of the learnings from this year, if there's anything? I mean, we're not that we've finished learning this year. I think to some extent we're kind of only halfway through this learning, right, as we continue to adapt. But what are some of the learnings? You know, what would you suggest for, you know, it could be other public sector customers that are looking, you know, at this conversation now, or even other private sector customers? You know, what are the learnings from this year?
Well, there is that saying as don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough. Ultimately, build capability, do it in steps. That's not agile everything, but that is saying, you know, don't go for, you know, these things that are a year away. COVID wouldn't give us that grace, and we've demonstrated that we can do things incrementally when we focus our time. But what has absolutely been forced to be pushed away is anything that can be cut away should be cut away. Governance is important. We are spending public money. We take that very, very seriously. However, appropriate governance, not unnecessary governance. Expeditious governance, not slow governance. So having quarterly meetings for something that's really important. Well, you know, are we only focusing on the bit that needs to be covered there? Can other decisions be pragmatically made based on good principles or safeguarding? We know what we're here to do. I think a lot of that will have an enduring effect. I think certainly across wider government and arguably the private sector too, there's lots of what you could consider the sort of C-suite stakeholder that was previously kind of suspicious of working from home. Thought it was, you know, people just put their feet up and watch Netflix. I think that myth is gone. It's gone, and it's gone permanently. So. And I think people also recognise that actually an event like this can still transfer information, allow people to connect together. It's not perfect. It absolutely isn't perfect, but a lot can be done, and using that spare time better, more effectively, is a good thing. However, we also know what we've lost. We know we've lost that human connection, and we missed that bit in terms of that cohesiveness. I have a team of people that have been working for me for the last 9 months that I've met once in real life, and you know, we missed that. And actually, to get together, I probably don't need to cover the stuff I'd cover off in a team meeting. Probably just the one time we met, we had an hour meeting and a 2-hour lunch. That gives you an idea of actually the bit that we missed. So I think that will be part of the learning of what that human contact was really giving us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think that goes for all of us, that we're looking forward to certainly not rolling back. I think I'm slightly worried that some of these organizations, as we, you know, roll out the vaccine, etc., and things, never going to go back to normal, but certainly go back to a stage of people going back to the office. And I do hope that all of the good learnings that we've taken, you know, in terms of, like you said, expediting some of the governance procedures and things like that, I hope that doesn't roll back. You know, I hope it doesn't go, oh, that was an existential time. Now we're going to go back to the way that we did things before and take 6 months to look at new technology or anything like that. I do hope that we continue to focus on, you know, looking forwards. Like you said, it's the fact that we've brought all of this technology, this 5 years worth of technology, you know, we shouldn't stop here. So we can't wait for another 5 years to continue to look at this. So I definitely think that's something that I think every organization needs to keep in mind, is that we've had all this fantastic change to some extent.
I think the jury's out to some degree, and I think there will be some people that will try and ping back like an elastic band to what was. I think they are, rather than the mainstream, going to be the outliers, and I think their effectiveness will be impacted so greatly to those that have learned and accommodated and moved forward. Will just mean that they have to fall back into the generally, forgive me, the phrase of the year, the new normal, which is actually much leaner and much more adaptable. I think we do want to have that contact for where it's adding value. For me to travel into London is, you know, realistically, 2.5 hours, I'm even 60 miles away, but just with commute, traveling, tube, all that kind of stuff, I have to justify that sort of 4 to 5 hours in a day that I lose from productivity to meet up with somebody. In some cases, that's absolutely appropriate. In most cases, it's arguably not. And then you multiply that by everything that could be. I think we will see the savings that we can have on buildings and travel are enormous.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, there is a wide recognition in the public sector, and certainly in policing, in terms of things will never be a slow again. So ultimately, we are adapting at this speed. We need to at least sustain that. We can't go back to kind of, it's fine now, COVID's over, and we can relax, because we can't. We do need to tweak a little bit, because I think this relentless pace, those of us that have been fortunate to not be economically disadvantaged, that we've been furloughed or lost our job, the pressure has increased, and the workload has extended, and some organizations in the private sector I look at and go, they're absolutely leading by example, balancing that out forcibly in some ways, and I think we could probably progress with some of that still. I don't think we'll bounce back, despite some people wanting to. I think we are forever changed.
Oh, I hope so, and I will take your word for it, Simon. Okay, so we are very much towards the end of our session now. It's absolutely flown by, so thank you so much for talking with us today and giving a bit more of an overview. And thank you to everyone else who has joined us today, whether it's live or on demand. Thank you very much for your time, and hope to speak to you all a bit later on.
It's been my pleasure.
Thanks, Simon.